They buried him gently, a child, just 6 years old, in the soft clay of the Mekong Delta. Angkor Empire, Cambodia. 1st to 3rd century CE. No tomb, no gold, just pottery shards, river stones, and time. To the eye, he was ordinary, one of thousands buried before the rise of Angkor. But to science, he would become a fracture point in history, because when researchers sequenced his genome, ABM40, they called him. The results came back impossible. Nearly half of his DNA wasn't Khmer. It wasn't East Asian at all. It matched populations from southern India, Irula, Velar, Mala, Dravidian bloodlines, on Cambodian soil, in a child buried nearly 2,000 years ago. That number, 42 to 49% South Indian ancestry, blew past every expectation. Most modern Cambodians carry just 9 to 15%. It wasn't a trace. It was inheritance. This boy wasn't just touched by India. He was born of it, which means everything we thought we knew about early Khmer history might be wrong, because for decades, historians called Indianization a cultural wave. Art, language, gods, temples like Angkor Wat, inscriptions in Sanskrit, Hindu and Buddhist iconography. But this boy, this child, says otherwise. His DNA tells a story of bloodlines, not just beliefs, of migration, intermarriage. Entire families formed long before any temple rose from the jungle floor. And it gets stranger, because he was buried at the dawn of Funan, the first Khmer kingdom we know of. Was this child part of that origin? A royal bloodline? A migrant family? Or something even deeper? One child, one genome. And suddenly, the narrative cracks. Because if Indian blood flowed in Khmer veins long before the Angkor Empire, then who were these people? Why did their genetic signature vanish so quickly? And what does this mean for the roots of Cambodian identity? The boy's bones are silent now, but the DNA, it's screaming. And the next clue lies in a kingdom lost to memory, Funan. But what kind of kingdom leaves no capital, no royal names, no monuments tall enough to defy the jungle? Just a whisper in Chinese records, and the bones of a child with South Indian DNA. Funan, the first state-level society in what we now call Cambodia. It rose from the Mekong Delta as early as the 1st century CE. And yet, for a place so crucial, it barely leaves a footprint. Chinese emissary Kang Tai visited in the 3rd century CE and wrote of an advanced kingdom, with canals like veins, brick cities like lungs, and Indian scripts etched on palm leaves. But he never named a king, never described a palace, just presence. Then came the twist. In 2022, a paper published in Scientific Reports by Changmai et al. Changed everything. Inside a grave at Wat Kamnu, in the heart of Angkor Empire, they pulled DNA from a 1,900-year-old child. That's the same boy we met. And that one genome confirmed it. Indian ancestry was here. Early, deep, intimate. Not 9th century, not Angkor, but 1st to 3rd century CE. Funan's very foundation. And here's what archaeology missed. Burial sites like Wat Kamnu and nearby OCEO contain Indian-style carnelian beads, next to Southeast Asian rice pots, South Asian high alumina glass, mixed with native tools. It wasn't trade. It was fusion. A mother from Mekong, a father from Tamalakam, a child born of both, buried quietly in the soil of a kingdom that had no script of its own, just the legacy of blood. And now the map changes. Because if Funan was this intertwined with South India, how many others were there? How many children carried this story before the jungle swallowed their names? But the strangest part isn't what was found. It's what's missing. That powerful South Indian ancestry, 42 to 49% in that boy, is barely 9% in modern Khmer. So the real mystery begins here. How did this ancient Indian ancestry almost disappear from modern Cambodians? To solve this mystery, scientists had to go even deeper, into the mitochondria of the Khmer, because the numbers don't match. In the child from Angkor Empire, ABM40, dated 78 to 234 CE, South Indian DNA accounted for up to 49% of his genome. But modern Cambodians? Just 9 to 15% on average. A genetic collapse across time. And this isn't a guess. It's from peer-reviewed studies, including Changmai et al. 2022, Scientific Reports, and PLOS Genetics, 2022. Both confirmed a steep drop-off in South Asian admixture, even though cultural Indianization was spreading more visibly than ever. So how does ancestry this powerful almost vanish? 3 key forces. First, demographic influx. During the Bronze and Iron Ages, East Asian-related farmers migrated south from southern China, merging with native Austroasiatic speakers. Genomes from northern Vietnam, circa 2000 BP, and Laos show this transition clearly. The result? A wave of East Asian ancestry that overwhelmed smaller South Asian genetic traces over time. Second, social stratification and reproductive bias. That ancient child, ABM 40, likely came from an elite or trade-link family. Their Indian lineage may not have been widely spread across the rural Khmer population. Over centuries, the genetic signal of a few high-status individuals gets diluted, even erased, when surrounded by large, less admixed populations. Third, population bottlenecks and historical trauma. The fall of Angkor in the 15th century, triggered by climate change, conflict, and foreign pressures, led to mass displacement. But the most devastating erasure came later, 1975 to 1979, under the Khmer Rouge. 2 million deaths. Entire family lines were extinguished. Modern genetic diversity reflects that rupture. So today's Cambodians don't lack South Indian heritage. They reflect what remained after centuries of absorption, replacement, and collapse. But there's a signal that doesn't wash away so easily. Mitochondrial DNA, passed only from mother to child, is a time capsule. And when scientists looked into Khmer maternal lines, what they found rewired everything we thought we knew about Cambodia's genetic past. Because inside those mitochondria were whispers from the first humans to ever walk this land. But while the mothers told one story, the fathers told another. It starts with a cell. Mitochondria, tiny energy engines inside us, passed only from mother to child. No mixture, no reshuffling. Just a pure maternal line, carried like an heirloom through every generation. And in Cambodia, those maternal lines are ancient. In 2021, a study by Streiter et al., using data from 299 Cambodians, uncovered something stunning. Unique mitochondrial haplogroups, B5A1, F1A1, M12B, with coalescence ages stretching back 34,000 to 60,000 years. Not from India, not from China, but rooted in Southeast Asia itself, likely descending from the first humans who migrated out of Africa along the coastal route. This means Khmer women, mothers and daughters, carry unbroken genetic memories that reach back to the Upper Paleolithic. And here's where the contrast hits. Because while autosomal DNA showed Indian admixture fading, and paternal lines like Y chromosome are 1A1, Indian-linked, appeared only in traces, the maternal ancestry never left. Macrohaplogroups are M and N dominate Khmer mitochondria. In particular, B5A1, now confirmed to have likely originated in mainland Southeast Asia around 34,220 years ago. Zhang et al., 2013. These lineages didn't just survive, they expanded outward, found in populations from Cambodia to Madagascar. But it's not just numbers. Khmer burial traditions, seen at sites like Phum Snay, blend the physical orientation, grave offerings, and funerary architecture of Hoabinian-era foragers with Dravidian parallels. A cultural fusion mirroring the same genetic layering. Stone tools alongside glass beads. Neolithic rice pots next to Indian carnelian. It's not a story of invasion. It's a story of layering. Austroasiatic mothers from prehistory, and Indian fathers from the early kingdoms. Which leads us here. Because if the maternal line tells a tale of deep continuity, then what does the paternal DNA say? Where did these Indian-linked male ancestors come from? And why do their signatures look so different from the mothers? To find that answer, we have to follow the men. Because while the mothers stayed rooted in time, the fathers came by sea. The Y chromosome, passed only from father to son, draws a different map. And it doesn't lead north. It leads west, across the Bay of Bengal. The dominant paternal signature in modern Khmer men is O2A1, M95, an ancient Austroasiatic lineage. But layered within that is something else. Our 1A1A1B2-123, a branch common in the Indian subcontinent, especially South India, where the Irula and Velula communities reside, and it appears in 3 to 7% of Khmer males today. That number might seem small, until you remember, Y-DNA doesn't fade gently. It enters by migration, intermarriage, or conquest. And in this case, it enters through ports. Between the 1st century BCE and the 3rd century CE, Indian maritime trade exploded. Tamil merchants from Puampuhar, Arakamidu, and Kavaripattinam crossed the Indian Ocean, navigating monsoon winds to reach the Mekong Delta. And what they brought wasn't just spices, scripts, or sandalwood. They brought lineage. Archaeological digs at OCEO and Angkor Empire reveal South Indian artifacts, carnelian beads, gold medallions, Hindu-style amulets, alongside Khmer pottery. But here's where the genes meet the myths. According to Khmer origin legend, a South Indian Brahmin named Kondinya married a local Naga princess named Soma. Together, they founded the kingdom of Funan. For years, this was dismissed as a story. But the Y-DNA tells us, men from South India were here. Their genes are still alive in Khmer blood, and their arrival matches the very century Kondinya was set to sail ashore. What if that myth is an ancestral memory? Not fiction, but family history passed through ritual and royal bloodlines. A lineage that once ruled and reshaped a civilization. Because these fathers didn't just dock, trade, and leave. They married. They ruled. They seeded dynasties. Which leads us to the greatest Khmer mystery of all. Could this bloodline have built the empire of Angkor? Because what rose next wasn't just a kingdom. It was an astronomical machine built from stone. A civilization so vast, so mathematically perfect, that satellites today still trace its canals from space. The Khmer Empire, 802 to 1431 CE, became one of the most powerful forces in pre-modern Asia, under kings like Jayavarman II, who declared himself a Devaraja, a god-king. The Khmer turned wetlands into engineered marvels, temples aligned with solstices, city grids based on cosmology. But behind the iconography, a deeper story slept. When scientists examined genome-wide data from modern Khmer and Thai Khmer populations, Changmai al. 2022, PLOS Genetics, they found an unexpected echo. A second wave of South Asian admixture, smaller than the one found in the Funan child, but unmistakable, dated to between 800 and 1300 CE. Right at the peak of the Angkor Empire. Admixture analysis using alder decay curves and QPDM modeling pointed to sources from Dravidian-speaking regions of South India, Brahmin and merchant castes alike. And this time, it wasn't just one child. The Indian signal appeared across lowland Khmer populations, but not in hill tribes or Austroasiatic minorities. This was targeted, urban, elite gene flow, tied directly to trade and power. Artifacts from Angkor reinforce it. At Angkor Empire, Phnom Penh, and across the lower Mekong basin, archaeologists unearthed Indian-style inscriptions, high alumina glass beads, and bronze Shiva lingams. Angkor temples tell the rest, Brahmanic ritual spaces, Sanskrit verses, and gods from Tamil Nadu etched into Cambodian stone. Yet, the spoken language was Old Khmer. The people were still Austroasiatic. The empire was not India transplanted. It was Khmer reimagined, with Indian blood stitched into its veins. Even the monumental faces of Bayon, with their enigmatic smiles, may reflect this fusion. Royal, serene, and genetically blended. But even as the Angkor Empire reached its zenith, the jungle held its secrets. Because just beyond the temple walls, past the great reservoirs, past the royal roads, archaeologists began finding something stranger. Older than the empire, older than Funan, and unlike anything Indian. A human ancestry buried so deep, it predates kings, empires, even farming. Because just outside the empire's walls, something even older was waiting to be found. Not a ruin, not a script, not a king's name etched in stone, but a whisper trapped in bone. Long before Funan, before Angkor, before even the first rice fields were planted, the lands of Cambodia were home to a different people. Hunters, foragers, nomads who left no cities behind, but whose blood still runs in modern veins. They're called the Hoabinian, and their story begins over 45,000 years ago. Archaeological sites, like Long Speen Cave in Battambang province, tell us this. These were the first humans to walk the forest floor of Cambodia. They shaped limestone tools, roasted mollusks in fire pits, and buried their dead with an eerie consistency. And for decades, science had no idea who they truly were, until the genome spoke. In 2018, a landmark study by Lipson et al., analyzing pre-Neolithic skeletons from Malaysia and Laos, revealed an ancient genetic thread. These individuals carried basal East Eurasian ancestry, distinct from later East Asian rice-farming migrants. And when compared to modern populations, Khmer DNA still echoes with their legacy. Mitochondrial haplogroups like M12b and F1A1A are rare, deeply divergent, and appear in both ancient Hoabinian remains and present-day Cambodians. These lineages suggest unbroken maternal descent from the region's original inhabitants. Even stranger, dental traits. Modern Khmer teeth show patterns, like shovel-shaped incisors, extra-cusped molars, and toroodontism, that mirror ancient Hoabinian skeletons. Traits unchanged over tens of thousands of years. Cultural remnants survive too. The buried bodies at Long Speen show fetal position interments, mirrored millennia later in early Khmer burial sites like Phum Sne. This isn't a myth. It's a memory. Genetic, cultural, intimate, because beneath every temple is a grave older than writing, and behind every Khmer face is a trace of a people who never called themselves Khmer. But here's the riddle. If this ancient bloodline was always here, across generations, across empires, then why did Indian ancestry show up so powerfully in just one child? And what happened to all the others? To answer that, we follow the wind. Not inland, not north, but across the sea, where the monsoon cycle dictated everything. Because between the 1st century BCE and the 7th century CE, the Indian Ocean wasn't a border. It was a highway. And from Tamilakkam's Coromandel coast, boats launched with spices, cotton, ivory, and passengers. Not all were traders. Some were priests. Some were craftsmen. And some, perhaps, were fathers. This was the maritime Silk Road, not of silk alone, but of marriage, memory, and migration. Ports like Pura, Arakamiddu, and Sapatma in South India connected directly to Oceo, Kandal, and the early Mekong kingdoms. Indian merchant guilds, like the Manigramam and Ayavol 500, left epigraphic trails across Southeast Asia. But DNA left something more permanent. The child buried at Angkor Empire, ABM 40, carried 49% South Indian ancestry. Yet this genetic signal doesn't appear in Cambodian hill tribes, forest peoples, or upland minorities. It appears only in lowland urban cemeteries, in places with access to international maritime trade. A 2022 genomic study by Changmai et al. Confirmed the link. South Asian admixture in Southeast Asia is tightly correlated with ancient port networks, not geography alone. This means the Indian blood that entered Cambodia didn't drift in slowly. It arrived with purpose. On ships, into cities, through alliances, marriages, power. But it didn't reach everyone. Hill tribes in Cambodia's interior show no trace of Indian admixture. Their DNA remains Hoabinian, Austroasiatic, deep, unmixed, ancient. So while one half-Indian child was buried in stone and memory, others, millions of others, lived untouched by the sea. This wasn't a nationwide transformation. It was selective, geopolitical, maritime. And now we must ask, if that child from Angkor Empire was part Indian, then what happened to his children? His bloodline? Did it rise with the empire, or vanish into the dust? Because what happened to that half-Indian child's descendants might rewrite the very idea of what it means to be Khmer. But what if that rewriting already happened, quietly, invisibly, while no one was watching? Because sometimes blood doesn't vanish. It just stops being spoken about. After the golden centuries of Angkor, Cambodia began to fracture. In 1431 CE, the capital was sacked by Ayutthaya forces. The hydraulic cities fell silent. The temples turned to vine. Royal bloodlines scattered. Populations collapsed. And history moved without asking who stayed behind. But genes keep score. Between the 15th and 20th centuries, Cambodia was pulled through a gauntlet of trauma. Thai invasions, Vietnamese encroachment, colonialism, world wars. Each era brought loss, not just of cities, but of identity. Then came the worst blow. 1975 to 1979, the Khmer Rouge, a radical regime that turned rice fields into killing grounds. An estimated 2 million people died. Doctors, artists, monks, entire families, all erased. Not just names and faces, but genetic lines, wiped from the future. And this is where science reveals what memory forgot. Because in genetics, there's a process called drift. Over time, rare lineages, like South Asian paternal haplogroups or unique maternal markers, can disappear, purely by chance. Especially in small, traumatized populations. That child from 1,800 years ago, half Indian, born in the Mekong lowlands, may have had descendants. But after centuries of war, migration, assimilation, and genocide, his bloodline may have thinned into silence. It happens gradually. A father has only daughters. A family dies in famine. A small village never rebuilds. And the story written in chromosomes is never passed on. But not all is lost. Because while those lineages faded from sight, they weren't erased completely. They were submerged beneath dominant genes, beneath rewritten history, waiting, quiet, intact. And then, in labs across the world, in Copenhagen, Bangkok, Berkeley, they began to speak again. Through teeth, through bones, through buried children and forgotten graves. Because the genes weren't lost. They were hidden. And now they speak again. But what they're about to say will challenge everything. Because buried beneath every Khmer stone is a silent genome waiting to be read. In 2022, geneticists led by Changmai et al. Published a landmark study in PLOS genetics. They sampled genomes from Cambodian, Lao, Thai, and Vietnamese populations. Their tools, QPADM, F4 ratio statistics, and alder admixture decay, revealed what textbooks never taught. There wasn't just one wave of Indian contact. There were two. The first, at least 1,500 to 2,000 years ago, aligned with early trade hubs like OCEO, tied to the ancient Funan kingdom. This wave left its trace in individuals like ABM 40, the Angkor Empire child, who carried 50% South Indian DNA, likely from Dravidian Tamil or Malayalam-speaking populations. The second wave, between 800 to 1,300 CE, matched the Angkor Empire's peak. It left lighter, subtler imprints, 7 to 14% South Asian ancestry, visible only in lowland populations tied to ports and political centers. The mountain peoples, untouched. This wasn't a national transformation. It was selective, elite-driven fusion. Even deeper, mitochondrial studies from Zhang et al., 2013, and Streiter et al., 2021, showed maternal haplogroups like M12B, B5A1, and F1A1 going back 34,000 to 60,000 years, to Hoabinian foragers, not Indian settlers. And yet, this ancient substrate coexists with Indian paternal lines like R1A1A2123 and H1A1A, preserved in Khmer men today. This isn't a story of adoption. It's a story of entanglement, of fused bloodlines, intercultural intimacy, and myth turned molecular. Because the tale of Kondinya and Soma, a Brahmin who marries a serpent princess, now makes genetic sense. The royal Naga wasn't just symbolic. She was indigenous. Her children weren't metaphors. They were real. This child of two worlds, South India and ancient Cambodia, lives on in modern DNA. In temples, in rituals, in the rhythm of Khmer drums echoing Tamil beats. And so we ask, if DNA is now the oracle, then what other secrets has it yet to whisper beneath the soil of Southeast Asia? Because one child, just one, unearthed from a modest burial in Angkor Empire, was enough to rattle 2,000 years of accepted history. So imagine what happens when we find the next. Not a king, not a warrior, but another forgotten child, another genetic ghost, buried just beneath our feet, somewhere in the red sands of Savanakhet Province, Laos, or under the shaded groves of Priya Vihir. Another voice sleeps in silence. In Tracheo, the ancient capital of Lam AP. Archaeologists have already recovered burnt brick temples with Sanskrit inscriptions dated to 4th century CE, but the bones beneath them remain untested. And this is no longer guesswork. In 2023, researchers from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, in collaboration with the Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences, began sequencing ancient samples from central Vietnam and southern Laos, targeting individuals suspected to carry Austroasiatic and Dravidian fusion ancestry. Their aim? To resolve the unexplored genetic bridge between the Cham, Khmer, and Indianized maritime communities. At the same time, ongoing excavations at Phnom Kulen, the sacred birthplace of the Angkor kings, have revealed human remains dating to before the rise of Jayavarman II. These may hold the next genome, another voice ready to rewrite the script. Because here's what we've learned. History doesn't end. It expands. The Khmer story was never static. It evolved through sea routes and burial jars, through forgotten marriages and vanished tongues. And the next chapter won't be written in a temple. It'll come from a lab, from isotope analysis in Germany, from Petra's bones in Bangkok, from teeth in a grave no one thought to open. Because somewhere out there, beneath the soil of Southeast Asia, a child waits. And when we find them, they'll speak, not in words, but in base pairs, in haplogroups, in echoes we can finally hear. And when they speak, will we know how to listen? Because the past isn't gone. It was just waiting for someone to listen. And maybe that someone was always supposed to be you.